All right, guys, welcome back to Chapter 6, Part 2. The two questions you had to answer for the first part were, how does Miss Peregrine know that Jacob was on the island? And number 2, why does Grandpa Portman let himself grow old? Do you think that he made the right choice? So if you remember from the last video, Emma took Jacob to the house. Remember, they are living in a temporal loop, and this loop was created to save the kids from the bombing, September 3rd, 1940. So they're living it that day on repeat, which is why none of the kids get older. Now, Grandpa Portman left to do something. That's what I'm looking for in your answers. What was more important for him? What did he do when he left that temporal loop, which led to him growing old and not living in the same day on repeat? We've now met Miss Peregrine. She shared that there were other peculiars, that there were other temporal loops depending on the person, and that the peculiars were not accepted by the rest of the population, and that's why they have chosen to just live in this loop and interact only with each other. So the last thing that had happened was that she invited Jacob to stay for dinner, and he agreed. He had shared with her that his grandfather had passed away. Miss Peregrine did not want the children to know, but Emma was eavesdropping outside the door, and she left in tears. I'm afraid that's all the time I have at the moment. I do hope you'll stay for supper. I said that I would, that my father might be wondering where I was, hardly crossed my mind. I squeezed out from behind the desk and began following her to the door. But then another question occurred to me, one that had been nagging at me for a long time. Was my grandfather really running from the Nazis when he came here? He was, she said. A number of children came to us during those awful years leading up to the war. There was so much upheaval. She looked pained, as if the memory was still fresh. I found Abraham at a camp for displaced persons on the mainland. He was a poor, tortured boy, but so strong. I knew at once that he belonged with us. I felt relieved. At least that part of his life was as I had understood it to be. There was one more thing I wanted to ask, though, and I didn't quite know how to put it. Was he, my grandfather, was he like us? I nodded. She smiled strangely. He was like you, Jacob, and she turned and hobbled towards the stairs. Miss Peregrine insisted that I wash off the bog mud before sitting down to dinner, and asked Emma to run me a bath. I think she hoped that by talking to me a little, Emma would start to feel better, but she wouldn't even look at me. I watched as she ran cold water into the tub, then warmed it with her bare hands, swirling them around until steam rose. That is awesome, I said, but she left without saying a word in response. Once I turned the water thoroughly brown, I toweled off and found a change of clothes hanging from the back of the door. Baggy tweed pants, a button-up shirt, and a pair of suspenders that were far too short, but that I couldn't figure out how to adjust. I was left with the choice of wearing the pants either around my ankles or hitched up to my belly button. I decided the latter was the lesser of the evils, so I went downstairs to have what would likely be the strangest meal of my life while dressed like a clown without makeup. Dinner was a dizzying blur of names and faces, many of them half remembered from photographs and my grandfather's long-ago descriptions. When I came into the dining room, the kids, who'd been clamoring noisily for seats around the long table, froze and stared at me. I got the feeling they didn't get a lot of dinner guests. Miss Peregrine, already seated at the head of the table, stood up and used the sudden quiet as an opportunity to introduce me. For those of you who haven't already had the pleasure of meeting him, she announced, this is Abraham's grandson, Jacob. He is our honored guest and has come a very long way to be here. I hope you will treat him accordingly. Then she pointed to each person in the room and recited their names, most of which I immediately forgot, as happens when I'm nervous. The introductions were followed by a barrage of questions, which Miss Peregrine batted away with rapid-fire efficiency. Is Jacob going to stay with us? Not to my knowledge. Where's Abe? Abe is busy in America. Why does Jacob got Victor's trousers on? Victor doesn't need them anymore, and Mr. Portman's are being washed. What's Abe doing in America? At this question, I saw Emma, who'd been glowering in a corner, rise from her chair and stalk out of the room. The others, apparently used to her volatile moods, paid no attention. Never mind what Abe's doing, Miss Peregrine snapped. When's he coming back? Never mind that, too. Now let's eat. Everyone stampeded to their seats. Thinking I'd found an empty chair, I went to sit and felt a fork jab my thigh. Excuse me, cried Millard. But Miss Peregrine made him give it up anyway, sending him out to put clothes on. Remember, Millard is invisible, so Jacob didn't know he was sitting there. How many times must I tell you, she called after him, polite persons do not take their supper in the nude. Kids with kitchen duty appeared bearing trays of food, all covered with gleaming silver tops so that you couldn't see what was inside, sparkling wild speculation about what might be for dinner. Otter's Wellington, one boy cried. Salted kitten and shrew's liver, another said, to which the younger children responded with gagging sounds. But when the covers were finally lifted, a feast of kingly proportions was revealed, a roasted goose, its flesh a perfect golden brown, a whole salmon and a whole cod, each outfitted with lemons and fresh dill and pats of melting butter, a bowl of steamed mussels, platters of roasted vegetables, loaves of bread still cooling from the oven, and all manner of jellies and sauces I didn't recognize, but that looked delicious. It all glowed invitingly in the flicker of the gaslight lamps, a world away from the oily stews of indeterminate origin I'd been choking down at the priest hole. I hadn't eaten since breakfast and proceeded to stuff myself silly. It shouldn't have surprised me that peculiar children have peculiar eating habits, but between forkfuls of food I found myself sneaking glances around the room. Olive, the levitating girl, had to be belted into a chair screwed to the floor so that she wouldn't float up to the ceiling. So the rest of us wouldn't be plagued by insects. Hugh, the boy who had bees living in his stomach, ate under a large mosquito net at a table for one in the corner. Claire, a doll-like girl with immaculate golden curls, sat next to Miss Peregrine, but ate not a morsel. Aren't you hungry? I asked her. Claire don't eat with the rest of us, Hugh volunteered, a bee escaping from his mouth. She's embarrassed. I am not, she said, glaring at him. Yeah? Then eat something. No one here is embarrassed of their gift, Miss Peregrine said. Miss Densmore simply prefers to dine alone. Isn't that right, Miss Densmore? The girl stared at the empty plate before her, clearly wishing that all the attention would vanish. Claire has a back mouth, explained Millard, who sat beside me now in a smoking jacket and nothing else. A what? Go on, show him, someone said. Soon, everyone at the table was pressuring Claire to eat something, and finally, just to shut them up, she did. A leg of goose was set before her. She turned around in her chair, and gripping its arms, she bent over backward, dipping the back of her head to the plate. I heard a distinct smacking sound, and when she lifted her head again, a giant bite had disappeared from the goose leg. Beneath her golden hair was a set of sharp-toothed jaws. Suddenly, I understood the strange picture of Claire that I had seen in Miss Peregrine's album, to which the photographer had devoted 2 panels, one for her daintily pretty face, and another for the curls that so thoroughly masked the back of her head. Claire turned forward and crossed her arms, annoyed that she'd let herself be talked into such a humiliating demonstration. She sat in silence while the others peppered me with questions. After Miss Peregrine had dismissed a few more about my grandfather, the children turned to other subjects. They seemed especially interested in what life in the 21st century was like. What sort of flying motor cars do you have? Asked a pubescent boy named Horace, who wore a dark suit that made him look like an apprentice undertaker. None, I said. Not yet, anyway. Have they built cities on the moon? Another boy asked, hopefully. We left some garbage and a flag there in the 60s, but that's about it. Does Britain still rule the world? Not exactly. They seemed disappointed. Sensing an opportunity, Miss Peregrine said, "You see, children, the future isn't so grand after all. Nothing wrong with the good old here and now." I got the feeling this was something she often tried to impress upon them, with little success. But it got me wondering, just how long had they been here in the good old here and now? "Do you mind if I ask how old you all are?" I said. "I'm 83, said Horace. Olive raised her hand excitedly. "I'll be 75 and a half next week." I wondered how they kept track of the months and years if the days never changed. "I'm either 117 or 118, said a heavy-lidded boy named Enoch. He looked no more than 13. "I lived in another loop before this one," he explained. "I'm nearly 87, said Millard with his mouth full of goose drippings as he spoke, and a half-chewed mask quivered in his invisible jaw for all to see. There were groans as people covered their eyes and looked away. Then it was my turn. "I was 16, I told them. I saw a few kids' eyes widen. Olive laughed in surprise. It was strange to them that I should be so young, but what was strange to me was how young they seemed. I knew plenty of 80-year-olds in Florida, and these kids acted nothing like them. It was as if the constants of their lives here, the unvarying days, this perpetual deathless summer, had arrested their emotions as well as their bodies, sealing them in their youth like Peter Pan and his lost boys. A sudden boom sounded from outside, the second one this evening, but louder and closer than the first, rattling silverware and plates. "Hurry up and finish, everyone," Miss Peregrine sang out. And no sooner had she said it than another concussion jolted the house, throwing a framed picture off the wall behind me. "What is that?" I said. "It's those damned Jerrys again," growled Olive, thumping her little fist on the table, clearly in imitation of some ill-tempered adult. Then I heard what sounded like a buzzer going off somewhere far away, and suddenly it occurred to me what was happening. This was the night of September 3rd, 1940. And in a little while, a bomb was going to fall from the sky and blow a giant hole in the house. The buzzer was an air raid siren sounding from the ridge. "We have to get out of here," I said, panic rising in my throat. "We have to go before the bomb hits." "He doesn't know," giggled Olive. "He thinks we're going to die." "It's only the changeover," said Millard with a shrug of his smoking jacket. "No reason to get your knickers in a twist." "This happens every night?" Miss Peregrine nodded. "Every single evening," she said. Somehow, though, I was not reassured. "May we go outside and show Jacob?" said Hugh. "Yes, may we?" Claire begged, suddenly enthused after 20 minutes of sulking. "The changeover is ever so beautiful." Miss Peregrine demurred, pointing out that they hadn't yet finished their dinners, but the children pleaded with her until she relented. "All right, so long as you all wear your masks," she said. The children burst out of their seats and ran from the room, leaving poor Olive behind until someone took pity and came to unbelt her from her chair. I ran after them through the house into the wood-paneled foyer, where they each grabbed something from a cabinet before bounding out the door. Miss Peregrine gave me one too, and I stood turning it over in my hands. It looked like a sagging face of black rubber with wide glass portholes like eyes that were frozen in shock, and a droopy snout that ended in a perforated canister. "Go ahead," said Miss Peregrine. "Put it on." Then I realized what it was. A gas mask. I strapped it over my face and followed her out onto the lawn where the children stood scattered like chess pieces on an unmarked board, anonymous behind their upturned masks, watching billows of black smoke roll across the sky. Treetops burned in the hazy distance. The drone of unseen airplanes seemed to come from everywhere. Now and then came a muffled blast I could feel in my chest, like the thump of a second heart, followed by waves of broiling heat, like someone opening and closing an oven right in front of me. I ducked at each concussion, but the kids never so much as flinched. Instead, they sang. Their lyrics timed perfectly to the rhythm of the bombs. Run, rabbit, run, 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 run. Bang, bang, bang goes the farmer's gun. He'll get by without his rabbit pie, so run, rabbit, run. Bright tracer bullets scored the heavens just as the song ended. The kids applauded like onlookers at a fireworks display, violent slashes of color reflected in their masks. This nightly assault had become such a regular part of their lives that they'd ceased to think of it as something terrifying. In fact, the photograph I'd seen of it on Miss Peregrine's album had been labeled Our Beautiful Display. And in its own morbid way, I suppose it was. It began to drizzle, as if all that flying metal had riven holes in the clouds. The concussions came less frequently. The attack seemed to be ending. The children started to leave. I thought we were going back inside, but they passed the front door and headed to another part of the yard. Where are we going? I asked two masked kids. They said nothing, but seemed to sense my anxiety. They took me gently by the hands and led me along with the others. We rounded the house to the back corner where everyone was gathering around a giant topiary. This one wasn't a mythical creature, though, but a man reposing in the grass, one arm supporting him, the other pointing to the sky. It took a moment before I realized that it was a leafy replica of Michelangelo's fresco of Adam from the Sistine Chapel. Considering that it was made from bushes, it was really impressive. You could almost make out the placid expression on Adam's face, which had two blooming gardenias for eyes. So they're outside in the garden and they're looking at this statue, basically, that had been cut into bushes. I saw the wild-haired girl standing nearby. She wore a flower print dress that had been patched so many times it almost looked like a quilt. I went over to her, pointing to Adam. "Did you make this?" The girl nodded. "How?" She bent down and held one of her palms above the grass. A few seconds later, a hand-shaped section of blades wriggled and stretched and grew until they were brushing the bottom of her palm. "That," I said, "is crazy." Clearly, I was not at my most articulate. Someone shushed me. The children were all standing silently with their necks craned, pointing at a section of sky. I looked up but could see only clouds of smoke, the flickering orange of fires reflected against them. Then I heard a single airplane engine cut through the rest. It was close and getting closer. Panic flooded me. This is the night they were killed. Not just the night, but the moment. Could it be, I wondered, that these children died every evening only to be resurrected by the loop like some Sisyphean suicide cult, condemned to be blown up and stitched back together for eternity? Something small and gray parted the clouds and came hurtling toward us. A rock, I thought, but rocks don't whistle as they fall. Run, rabbit, run. I would have, but now there was no time. All I could do was scream and dive to the ground for cover, but there was no cover. So I hit the grass and threw my arms over my head as if somehow that would keep it attached to my body. I clenched my jaw and shut my eyes and held my breath, but instead of the deafening blast I was bracing for, everything went completely quiet. Profoundly quiet. Suddenly, there were no growling engines, no whistling bombs, no pops of distant guns. It was as if someone had muted the world. Was I dead? I uncovered my head and slowly looked behind me. The wind-bent boughs of trees were frozen in place. The sky was a photograph of arrested flames licking a cloud blank. Drops of rain hung suspended before my eyes, and in the middle of the circle of children, like the object of some arcane ritual, there hovered a bomb, its downward-facing tip seemingly balanced on Adam's outstretched finger. Adam, the bush. Then, like a movie that burns in the projector while you're watching it, a bloom of hot and perfect whiteness spread out before me and swallowed everything. The first thing I heard when I could hear again was laughter. Then the white faded away, and I saw that all were arranged around Adam just as we had been before. But now the bomb was gone, and the night was quiet, and the only light in the cloudless sky was a full moon. Miss Peregrine appeared above me and held out her hand. I took it, stumbling to my feet in a daze. "Please accept my apologies," she said. "I should have better prepared you." She couldn't hide her smile, though, and neither could the other kids as they stripped off their masks. I was pretty sure I'd just been hazed. I felt lightheaded and out of sorts. "I should probably head home for the night," I said to Miss Peregrine. "My dad'll worry." Then I added quickly, "I can go home, right?" "Of course you can," she replied, and in a loud voice asked for a volunteer to escort me back to the cairn. To my surprise, Emma stepped forward. Miss Peregrine seemed pleased. "Are you sure about her?" I whispered to the headmistress. "A few hours ago, she was ready to slit my throat." "Miss Bloom may be hot-tempered, but she is one of my most trusted wards," she replied, "and I think you and she may have a few things to discuss away from curious ears." 5 minutes later, the two of us were on our way, only this time my hands weren't tied and she wasn't poking a knife in my spine. A few of the younger kids trailed us as far as the edge of the yard. They wanted to know whether I'd be back again tomorrow. I made vague assurances, but I could hardly wrap my mind around what was happening at this moment, much less in the future. We passed into the dark woods alone. When the house had disappeared behind us, Emma held out an upturned palm, flicked her wrist, and a petite ball of fire flared to life just above her fingers. She held it before her like a waiter carrying a tray, lighting the path and casting our twin shadows across the trees. "Have I told you how cool that is?" I said, trying to break a silence that grew more awkward by the second. "It isn't cool at all," she replied, swinging the flame close enough that I could feel its radiating heat. I dodged it and fell back a few paces. I meant it's cool that you can do that." "Well, if you'd speak properly, I might understand you," she snapped, then stopped walking. We stood facing each other from a careful distance. "You don't have to be afraid of me," she said. "Oh, yeah? How do I know you don't think I'm some evil creature and this is just a plot to get me alone so you can finally kill me?" "Don't be stupid," she said. "You came unannounced, a stranger I didn't recognize, and chased after me like a madman. What was I meant to think?" "Fine, I get it," I said, though I didn't really mean it. She dropped her eyes and began digging a little hole in the dirt with the tip of her boot. The flame in her hand changed color, fading from orange to a cool indigo. "It's not true what I said. I did recognize you." She looked up at me. "You look so much like him." "People tell me that sometimes." "I'm sorry I said all those terrible things earlier. I didn't want to believe you, that you were who you said. I knew what it would mean." So Emma is saying that she did recognize Jacob, that he looked exactly like Abe. And remember, Emma was in love with Abe when they were teenagers. "It's okay," I replied. "When I was growing up, I wanted so much to meet all of you. Now that it's finally happening," I shook my head. "I'm just sorry it has to be because of this," meaning because his grandfather passed away. And then she rushed at me and threw her arms around my neck, the flame in her hand snuffing out just before she touched me, her skin hot where she'd held it. We stood like that in the darkness for a while. Me and this teenaged old woman, this rather beautiful girl who had loved my grandfather when he was the age I am now. There was nothing I could do but put my arms around her too. So I did, and after a while, I guess, we were both crying. I heard her take a deep breath in the dark, and then she broke away. The fire flared back to life in her hand. "Sorry about that," she said. "I'm not usually so—" "Don't worry about it. We should be getting on." "Lead the way," I said. We walked through the woods in a comfortable silence. When we came to the bog, she said, "Step only where I step." And I did, planting my feet in her prints. Bog gases flared up in green pyrons in the distance, as if in sympathy with Emma's light. We reached the cairn and ducked inside, shuffling in single file to the rear chamber and then out again to a world shrouded in mist. She guided me back to the path, and when we reached it, she laced her fingers through mine and squeezed. We were quiet for a moment. Then she turned and went back, the fog swallowing her so quickly that for a moment I wondered if she'd been there at all. So he went back through the bog out of the temporal loop. So now it's back to real time. Returning to town, I half expected to find horse-drawn wagons roaming the streets. Instead, I was welcomed by the hum of generators and the glow of TV screens behind cottage windows. I was home, such as it was. Kev was manning the bar again and raised a glass in my direction as I came in. None of the men in the pub offered to lynch me. All seemed right with the world. I went upstairs to find Dad asleep in front of his laptop at our little table. When I shut the door, he woke up with a start. Hi! Hey! You're out late. Or are you? What time is it? I don't know, I said. Before 9, I think. The generators are still on. He stretched and rubbed his eyes. What do you do today? I was hoping I'd see you for dinner. Just explored the old house some more. Find anything good? Not really, I said, realizing that I probably should have bothered to concoct a more elaborate cover story. He looked at me strangely. Where'd you get those? Get what? Your clothes, he said. I looked down and realized I'd completely forgotten about the tweed pants and suspenders outfit I was wearing. I found them in the house, I said, because I didn't have time to think of a less weird answer. Aren't they cool? He grimaced. You put on clothes that you found? Jake, that's unsanitary. What happened to your jeans and jacket? I needed to change the subject. They got super dirty, so I trailed off, making a point of noticing the document on his computer screen. Whoa, is that your book? How's it coming? He slapped his laptop shut. My book isn't the issue right now. What's important is your therapy. I'm not sure that spending your days alone in that old house is really what Dr. Golan had in mind when he greenlighted this trip. Wow, I think that was the record, I said. What? The longest streak ever of you not mentioning my psychiatrist. I pretended to look at a non-existent wristwatch. 4 days, 5 hours, and 26 minutes, I sighed. It was good while it lasted. That man has been a great help to you, he said. God only knows the state you'd be in right now if we hadn't found him. You're right, Dad. Dr. Golan did help me, but that doesn't mean he has to control every aspect of my life. I mean, Jesus, you and Mom might as well buy me one of those little bracelets that says, what would Golan do? That way I can ask myself before I do anything. Before I take a dump, how would Dr. Golan want me to take this dump? Should I bank it off the side or go straight down the middle? What would be the most psychologically beneficial dump I could take? Dad didn't say anything for a few seconds, and when he did, his voice was all low and gravely. He told me that I was going birding with him the next day, whether I liked it or not. When I replied that he was sadly mistaken, he got up and went downstairs to the pub. I thought he'd be drinking or something, so I went to change out of my clown clothes, but a few minutes later, he knocked on my bedroom door and said there was someone on the phone for me. I figured it was Mom. So I gritted my teeth and followed him downstairs to the phone booth in the far corner of the pub. He handed me the receiver and went to sit at the table. I slid the door closed. Hello? I just spoke to your father, a man said. He sounded a little upset. It was Dr. Golan. I wanted to say that he and my dad could both stuff it up their asses, but I knew this situation required some tact. If I pissed Golan off now, it would be the end of my trip. I couldn't leave yet, not with so much more to learn about the peculiar children. So I played along and explained what I'd been up to, all except the kids in a time loop part, and tried to make it sound like I was coming around to the idea that there was nothing special about the island or my grandfather. It was like a mini session over the phone. I hope you're not just telling me what I want to hear, he said. That had become his standard line. Maybe I should come out there and come check on you. I could use a little vacation. How does that sound? Please be joking, I prayed. I'm okay, really, I said. Relax, Jacob, I'm only kidding, though Lord knows I could use some time away from the office, and actually, I believe you. You do sound okay. In fact, just now I told your father that probably the best thing he could do is give you a little breathing room and let you sort things out on your own. Really? You've had your parents and me hovering over you for so long. At a certain point, it becomes counterproductive. Well, I really appreciate that. He said something else I couldn't quite hear. There was a lot of noise on his end. It's hard to hear you, I said. Are you in a mall or something? The airport, he replied, picking up my sister. Anyway, all I said was to enjoy yourself, explore, and don't worry too much. I'll see you soon, all right? Thanks again, Dr. G. As I hung up the phone, I felt bad for having ragged on him earlier. That was twice now he'd stuck up for me when my own parents wouldn't. My dad was nursing a beer across the room. I stopped by his table on my way upstairs. About tomorrow, I said. Do what you want, I guess. Are you sure? He shrugged sullenly. Doctor's orders. I'll be home for dinner. Promise. He just nodded. I left him in the bar and went up to bed. Falling asleep, my thoughts drifted to the peculiar children and the first question they'd ask after Miss Peregrine had introduced me. Is Jacob going to stay with us? At the time, I'd thought, of course not. But why not? If I never went home, what exactly would I be missing? I pictured my cold, cavernous house, my friendless town full of bad memories, the utterly unremarkable life that had been mapped out for me. It never once occurred to me, I realized, to refuse it. And that is the end of chapter 6. So, the 4 questions you have to answer for chapter 6. Again, 1 and 2 were already given to you. Number 1, how does Miss Peregrine know that Jacob was on the island? Number 2, why does Grandpa Portman let himself grow old? Do you think he made the right choice? Number 3, describe the change in the loop. What happens? How do the peculiars react? What do you think this means? The change they're talking about is that change that happens when they put the gas masks on and they go outside. And number 4, what is a temporal loop? Describe where you would create one. So the first part of that question, what is a temporal loop? I described that at the beginning of this video. And describe where you would create one is just your opinion. Is there a day that you would like to relive over and over and over again? If you wouldn't create one, just explain why you wouldn't create one. So again, guys, I hope you are checking out these videos. I hope everyone is doing okay. Please, please, please make sure you have listened to all of chapter 6. Send me an email with the answers to these questions, and we will talk soon.